Welcome back to the channel, and today we have a PMP Knives double header for y'all. First up, the PMP Titano. This thing is a massive beast, totally unapologetic. In all dimensions, this thing is massive, coming in at 9.43 inches long with a massively wide 3.88 inch harpoon tanto shovel. Yeah, you heard me right, that's a shovel. My particular one is coated black. They had other versions as well. This one's in Bowler M390 stainless steel, a good edge retention steel, not a very tough steel. The jimping up here is nice and functional. It grips the thumb nicely. You have top swedge up here, then a grind here, tanto portion, high flat grind. There's a lot going on this blade. You do have a sharpening choil that does clear the plunge and should give you about probably 2 or 3 sharpenings before it'll start to widen up. You can see the plunge comes right there where my fingernail is. Guessing they put this hole in here just to help balance out the knife. We'll check that later. You have a very high flat grind, and it actually comes down to around 20 thousandths behind the edge, so they did a pretty good job of thinning it out as much as they possibly could. Gets up to 25 thousandths by that tip for some added strength to do some shoveling. So this straight edge portion right here, I'm thinking it's going to slice fairly well. Let's find out. I'm going to be honest, whenever I first took a look at this knife, I thought it was going to be an ergonomic hot mess, and I didn't think it was going to be able to slice all that well. But I did think, you know, it has a high flat grind, so it has a possibility, but that's some pretty massive blade stock it has. And I started doing the cardboard. And of course, if you have a good enough edge and it's not super thick behind the edge, it should still be able to slice pretty darn well. And so far, so good. The edge feels okay. It's not screaming sharp. It has a decent edge on it. Good enough to get through some cardboard. But definitely doesn't feel like it has a whole lot of bite. You know, it's too early to tell. But here, I'm not trying to make any super fine feather sticks. I'm basically testing the ergo. So I'm slowly starting to increase pressure into the wood. More and more and more. And I have to say, I was in awe of how comfortable this handle is for, you know, what it is. You know, it's still pretty blocky, but that little harpoon area is a nice little spot if you're in the saber grip, and then hammer grip. It's pretty darn comfortable because of the way the handle curves down. It's wide. It fills out the hand. Now, it's not something I would, you know, choose to grab if I was doing feather sticks or something like that, but if you had to, you could definitely get it done. And nothing, no crazy hot spots that I noticed. Nothing was really poking or prodding me, so not bad. I'd give it a pass on that. Now, during the 1/2 inch sisal rope, I really should have lifted this up onto a little block like I usually do with a tanto, but the master's blade, I figured I would just give it a shot. Sorry about that. And I can definitely feel it doesn't have a whole bunch of aggression to the edge, something I could easily fix with the sharpening. And after this video, of course, I will sharpen this knife. But I will say the heavy blade allows you to make these cuts a lot easier. You don't have to push down, not a quarter the amount because of the heavy mass of the blade. So with a nice sharp edge on it, it would have blaze through this, but without putting it up onto a block, I'm only getting a very small portion of that edge into the rope before it comes in contact with that flat cutting surface. So basically the transition spot, you can pretty much see like either that transition tip or right behind it is where I'm cutting at. I try to move it just to see if anything was better. Pinch grip's pretty good because that blade edge sits below the handle scale, so it wasn't too bad in that regard. Because it's a tanto, I had that secondary tip that I can use, and that weight really helped it go through the leather. And all these materials, for the most part, I was pretty darn impressed. Once again, that flat grinds ground thin enough to where it's not a folding pry bar, and for overall cutting performance, you know, if it would have had a better edge, I think this thing sliced really well, and it was a joy to use. It wasn't as bad as I expected it to be. You know, a lot of times they're just too thick behind the edge and very uncomfortable. Overall, I'd say it was good. Now let's test this edge. It still feels decent. It just didn't have much bite left to it. Yeah, it's still a decent edge. Might have a few hang-ups, but there's not any bite to it. I have to say, when I first got this, I did not expect it to perform half as good as it did and for it to be as comfortable as it was. But now let's take a look at the deployment and the action of the knife. You have a flipper tab and you have a blade hole. Now the flipper tab is almost underneath that pivot, so it's not going to be the snappiest flipper, but it's got some good jimping there and it still comes out. Once that masset blade takes over, it whips itself around, and then you can reverse flick that blade with the blade hole, or you can slow roll it. No, it's hard for me to thumb flick it because that is a pretty heavy blade there. It is riding on bearings, making it nice and smooth. Now, I'm glad it has somewhat of a controlled fall to it, because that would definitely be a guillotine if that thing came just thwacking down on your thumb. Now let's take a look at the handle area. You have some massive thick slabs of titanium with a massive titanium backspacer. The thickness on these titanium scales coming in at 0.66 inches thick. It filled out the hand nicely. All your hardware is flatheads, as you can see. Should be able to stick a penny or a dime in there if you need to adjust it out in the field. A little attitude adjuster back here. Raised jimps in the back on this side, and some fine geared pattern on the top. That's pretty smooth. Huge lanyard hole. I can almost fit a baby arm in there. You also have another secondary lanyard if you want to tie one from here to here, put a bike chain around it or something. Your pocket clip is only tip up, right hand carry only. I like the look of the pocket clip. It kind of goes with the flow. It looks like a scimitar blade. If you look this way, look at the handle right here, and then your blade right here. It's got a good bit of tension, but with something this massive, you definitely don't want it to be loose in the pocket. And you definitely have quite a bit of knife sticking out of the pocket, and this thing is going to take up the entire pocket. You're not going to put anything else in here. This is how far it goes, almost over half the size, and you have a flipper tab down here. I will say this thing is a chunk and definitely weighted my pockets down. Now, they did everything they could to lighten this up. And also, if you look on the inside, they skeletonized this as much as they possibly could all over the place. But with these proportions, nothing you can pretty much do. 321 grams or 11.322 ounces. Now let's take a look at the lockup. Mine is sitting at, I'd say, at around 30, maybe 40%. It's got a hardened stainless steel lock insert. Access to the lock bar is good because you have these cutouts on both sides and it's wide enough. I can get my thumb in there rather easily, but for me, I found it's easier if I do the claw method like that and then drop it onto the detent. And as you could probably guess, I cannot muster not a single bit of movement up or down, left or right out of this knife. Well, I didn't have a whole bunch of knives that were as big as this one, but these are pretty similar. We have the Cold Steel 4 Max Scout, which is a little bit bigger. Then we have the Cold Steel Recon 1, which is about the same overall in length. Two more knives pretty similar in length. We have the O-Knife Sentry L1 and the Vosteed Gator. Last, we have the PMP Grizzly and the Off-Grid Stinger XL. So nitpicks and complaints, maybe a little bit better of an edge, maybe a little bit more of a sharpening choil, but it's not bad. I would have loved to see a detent ball ramp because the detent hits right there, and a lot of times I do a double take on that and it hits and bounces back. But overall, love this knife. If you're ever on the fence, it'll definitely put a smile on your face. I know it did to me. Is it the most practical? Not in the least, but I absolutely love it. If either knife I show today interests you, I will have links down in the description. They are affiliate links, so if you want to help support what I do here on the channel, that is awesome. If not, a-okay. Next up, we have the PMP Beast Prime. This is a slimmer, but in my opinion, more user-friendly version of the Alpha Beast. One massive knife. I mean, just look at the proportion differences. This one's just a folding pry bar. This is a beast of a knife. However, it's more manageable than I expected, and I will explain what I mean later on. This bad boy's coming in at 9.22 inches long with a 4-inch Tanto blade of CPM 3V steel, which is an excellent choice for such a heavy-duty knife like this, because 3V is a super tough steel. It's an excellent edge-holding steel. It's not a stainless, so you definitely want to take care of it, but they do have a nice high satin finish on here, so that should help with the corrosion. The knife has some nice effective jimping up top, and it's well placed. You do have some venting on the blade, and I'm sure that is more to balance the knife out rather than aesthetics. You have a top swedge that comes down to thin the up tip a little bit, but you still have a very robust tip, and that 3V steel is going to allow you to poke and prod and do some light prying with this thing. You have a compound ground blade, tons of facets on here. I think it looks really nice. This tip portion's flat ground, making it a little bit thicker up here in the front. They do have a sharpening choil, however, it's just clearing the plunge line. You sharpen this up after once or twice maybe, it's going to start to widen in the back over here, so you're going to need to either open that up or just try to grind on this. Not going to be the easiest. I'm very glad they went with a nice deep hollow grind here. It's not a high hollow grind, but it still comes down around 15 thousandths behind the edge. So it should slice pretty darn well, especially if it has a nice sharp edge. Now I think it's time to see if this thing cuts well, or is it a sharpened pry bar. My knife came with a very good edge out of box, and being that it's CPM 3V, it should hold an edge really well. Not to mention it should be super tough. This hollow grind is making it slice way better than I expected. I mean, very good. You know, it's not going to really, the thicker blade stock's not going to be a problem unless you have some very dense material. We started doing the little fine curls just to see. And as you can see, it makes the fine curls rather easily. The heavy mass of that whopping blade stock makes it pretty easy to put a lot of pressure into what you're cutting. And it was pretty decently comfortable. You know, it wasn't the most comfortable knife in the world, but if you need to do something like this in a pinch, as you can see, you could definitely do it. I'm putting a lot of pressure into this wood, and you could also do a little bit of light chopping if you had to. I was kind of surprised of how I can maneuver this blade as good as I can, being that it's such a heavy blade. Now, here's where I could really tell that the edge was really good, nice and crisp, and it had good bite to it. And it's, if you've never cut with a good hollow grind, doing stuff like this is just a breeze. Of course, I decided to pull this one up on the block because of the Tanto straight edge. Just makes my life a lot easier and keeps me from getting extra blisters than I already have. Of course, I could have used the Tanto portion of that edge, but it's thicker and it's just not fun to use, or usually not fun to use. I can't really speak for this one because I didn't try it. But it is going through this rope like nobody's business. That once again, that heavy mask is making it much easier than normal because that mask is kind of pushing itself through the rope basically. The pinch grip was comfortable, of course, because I had gloves on, but we end up getting through 100 cuts before I run out of the strip I cut, and I definitely could have cut more, no doubt about it. The edge still feels great, and we're going to do a little bit of the chopping we did the other day to the 3 copper wires just to see how that 3V holds up. But if I have to take a wild guess, I would think it's going to do it without any problems. Now, the hollow grind could cause a problem. I don't think it will. We'll just have to wait and find out. Y'all let me know what y'all think it's going to do down in the comments. Here I'm making use of that secondary point of that Tanto, and it's performing really well. Now I'm testing out the Tanto portion just to see how the edge is. It's good. All this type of stuff, it was absolutely no problem. This is the only time I kind of felt the tearing effect because this is dense corner cardboard, And here I can still feel the knife has a lot of bite to it. And whenever we do get to the chopping, you might want to turn down your volume a little bit. This is a standard house wire with 3 copper wires. I'm going to check that edge. Absolutely no damage whatsoever. I couldn't even feel it when I rubbed my nail across it. We will test that edge in just a second, but it passed. No damage. Now let's test that edge out. See if there's any damage. I don't think there's a bit of damage. Let's see. There may be some slight dulling right here, but I hit the copper wire in this section right here, and not even a hang up. The only hang up is right in here where I cut all that sisal rope. I have to say the Beast Prime is by far my favorite knife that I've used from PMP Knives so far. This one really wowed me in so many different ways. Now let's take a look at the deployment, the action of this knife. Now it is a thumb stud only knife, and they do have the detent pretty stout on mine. I can still thumb flick it, but they did need to keep that detent rather stiff just so it would hold this big old chunk of blade stock in there. Let's see. Because this blade stock's coming in at around 0.23 inches, almost 6 millimeters thick, so it's a pretty hefty blade. I can still slow roll it. I just kind of got to get down underneath it with my thumb right there to slow roll it, and it's starting to break in really, really nicely since I've gotten it. I haven't taken it apart or anything. It is riding on ceramic bearings, and it is a fall shut knife, so you definitely want to get your fingers out of the way of the blade path. Now let's take a look at this stunning handle area. You got a nice fadeaway frag pattern on the titanium. This one has just a bead blasted finish. You have somewhat of a decorative pivot here, Torx T8. Now my biggest complaint on this knife, why I don't know, but they went with Torx T6. Come on, that should definitely, there should be nothing under T8 on this knife, if not even bigger, because this is a hard use knife. I mean, that's what this thing's built for. You do have a pretty massive lanyard hole right there, which I don't really mind on such a big knife like this. Massive titanium backspacer there, and these thick slabs of titanium are coming in at 0.67 inches thick, so pretty darn thick. You do have a milled titanium pocket clip with some ribbing in there, and it's kind of thin for its size. It's got some decent retention to it. I don't like that it's sitting on the texture. Now, it's not going to be a pocket shredder right away, but eventually that will probably wear a hole into your pocket. It's definitely not a deep carry clip. That's what you have sticking out. Now, it is tip up right hand carry only. It doesn't take up a whole lot of the pocket. I mean, I could probably fit my phone in my pocket. I just carried the knife by itself in the pocket whenever I carried it. I do like that I do have something to grab a hold to pull it out of the pocket for such a big knife. I don't want this thing going flying out of my hands. They also have tons of internal milling pocketing inside the titanium, bringing the weight to 242.5 grams or 8.553 ounces. And I must say, I was pretty impressed to see that the balance point is absolutely perfect. That's giving it that extra nimbleness in hand. Now let's take a look at the lockup after banging on it with that soft hammer. It didn't move any. That's where mine started. It's sitting, I'd say, at around 40% or so. Absolutely. When I say I cannot muscle any kind of movement up or down, left or right, bank vault lockup. The scales are wide, and you have these internal milling on both sides right there, so I can easily get my thumb in there, no problem, or the fat of my thumb. Quick size comparison with the Volsteed Gator and the Off-Grid Knives Stinger XL. Next we have the Cold Steel Recon 1 and the Cold Steel AD10, and it absolutely dwarfs the Ontario Rat 1 and 2. Nitpicks and complaints. These are just nitpicks because they're not hurting the functionality of the knife. I would have loved to see the sharpening choil increased a good bit. I would have loved to see a flat spot underneath that pocket clip just so it's not wearing the pockets out prematurely. And I think it would have been an awesome choice if they would have made the thumb studs external stops, meaning that the stop pin was the thumb studs up against the frame. That just makes it even more hard use. It's just a more heavier duty setup. But as you can see, I banged on this thing twice really hard to go through the copper wire, and it did nothing to the blade. There's absolutely no movement. The lockup stayed up strong, and if I did mess up that lockup any, I could always replace the hardened stainless insert. But overall, yes, these are two premium knives. Do I think they're worth the price point? The Beast Prime at 430 bucks. I definitely think that's worth the price tag. That is a massive chunk of 3V, and as y'all could see in the testing, it held up wonderfully. And this one has been a joy to carry and use. Now, I love the Titano, but me personally, I can't carry it as much as I can carry the Beast Prime. This one's just a little bit weighty for me, and it's just a massive knife in all dimensions. Now, I still love the knife. I would have loved to see 3V on this one as well. So these massive, hard-use looking knives, I'm so glad that they went with the 3V. Now, I know that brings the price tag up a good bit, but it makes sense. Or, you know, do this one in Magna Cut like they have the brand new Alpha Beast in Magna Cut. I want one of those as well. Definitely some awesome knives. I get it. If it's out of your price range, totally get it. You know, it's definitely a hard pill to swallow, and you got to make it worth it. You know, if this is your one and only, it's probably not going to be the best EDC unless you're a really big guy or you like to carry really heavy knives, because this one's still 8 ounces. So it's definitely not a featherweight. It's definitely more manageable than the Titano, but I absolutely love both of them. I can recommend them if none of the things I talked about are deal breakers. And like I said, they will be linked down in the description. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please leave those down below. I hope everybody's having an absolute amazing day, and I will see y'all on the next one. Peace.